very happy to be here, and this is the first of its kind that I'm attending. Yes, and I liked your metaphor a lot about putting the manure at the root, and there are a lot of such other phrases which are there, right? They say the tone at the top. There is a saying that the fish rots from the head, right? So when it comes to culture, it all starts from the top. But yeah, I often felt when we are talking to young people in organizations that it would have been great if some of these values were inculcated from a much younger age, because it becomes very difficult later to inculcate those. So I was looking at the topic. I'm supposed to be talking about building empathy at home and school. Okay. And the overarching topic is satisfying relationships and well-being. And I think these are pretty well connected. So interestingly, when I wrote the book called From Command to Empathy, this was way back in 2017, 2018. Empathy was one of those words which was good to have. Yeah. Today, suddenly in the post-pandemic world, it is suddenly a must-have. All companies are suddenly talking of empathy. Empathy has become a big buzzword right now. And we all love buzzwords, right? So everybody's latching onto that buzzword. So I think it'll be good to start with what is empathy, maybe talk a little bit about my understanding, and we'll take it from there. So essentially, it's about putting ourselves in the other person's shoes. Yeah. As I keep saying also about emotional intelligence, it's easier said than done. Concepts wise, they're very simplistic, but incredibly hard to do. You talked of my journey, and just to add to that, I was in the corporate world, had the privilege of working with a lot of large companies. At one point, I realized as I was growing in the organization that it was all about people. And I tell people that, this is not something I learned in IIT or IIM. This is something I learned from the real world. Unfortunately, it took me 20 years to learn it, but I hope younger people get it much earlier. Relationships are at the core of our well-being, of our fulfillment, and there's enough evidence and research to substantiate that. Okay, so empathy becomes very, very important. So it would be empathizing for content, emotion. Essentially, if I'm empathizing, I can think how you are thinking, I can feel how you are feeling. Now, so the question is, why is it suddenly empathy is so important, right? Today, companies are talking about how to build empathy. And I keep saying that it's not so much about building empathy, it's about bringing back empathy. Because we are born with empathy. There's enough neuroscience which shows that we are born with empathy. But somewhere along the line, I think we feel that, that all goes away. And we are very rational and we are very transactional in our approach. And to me, that is the biggest challenge that we are facing today. Okay, we have become very transactional in our approach. And unfortunately, when we are doing things offline, it often becomes more transactional. See, even when we are in office, at least you're going to the canteen, you're chatting with people, right? You're meeting in the corridor, you're talking of things outside of work. But our inherent tendency when we pick up the phone is to say, hey, tell me what's happened, or give me the status update, right? So we start by being very transactional. So we need to be aware of that, because empathy can only get reduced in the post-pandemic world, not enhanced, whereas the need of the hour is to make it more enhanced. Okay. Now, emotions, you talked about emotional intelligence, and I focus a lot on the why of emotional intelligence, because I think, based on my experience, emotions have always been very sidelined. It's always been given a bad name, right? So whenever somebody gets emotional, first thing you say, hey, don't get emotional, think rationally, right? It's almost like it's not good to be emotional. Now, the fact of the matter is, today we are living in a very, very different world. We are living in a world where creativity and innovation is most important. And these are things which you can't command people to do, okay? I can command obedience, I can command diligence. I can tell for somebody, hey, you need to be in the office by 9 o'clock. But I cannot tell somebody, hey, you need to be creative from tomorrow. It doesn't work that way, because creativity is very internal, right? It is about emotions. People need to feel safe in the environment. People should be able to take risks. The company should be able to, provide an atmosphere which allows for these things to happen. In fact, yesterday, a company I spoke to, they wanted to talk about psychological safety. It's a very big thing today. Are we creating a safe environment? And I think it's not only in the workplace. The command and control style that we had, which started at home, went on to school, in college, and continues at work, needs to go through a fundamental shift. Because we are no longer in industrial economy. That works fine as long as you're making boxes, and it's about how many boxes you're making per minute. If you're working with your hands, that model works perfectly. If you're working with your heads, the model changes completely. And whether we like it or not, today we need to work more with our heads than with our hands. Okay? In any organization, in any industry for that matter. So we need to refocus on emotions, and that is why empathy needs to be very important. We need to understand what drives our people, what drives our employees, what drives our customers. Otherwise, how will we sell our products? In terms of how to build empathy or how to bring back empathy, I think there are a lot of things that can be done. But let me just talk about one, which is about listening, right? And I keep saying this, that it really boils down to communication. And there are only 4 things in communication. We reading, writing, speaking, and listening. And the other 3, maybe we are taught, but we are not taught how to listen. And it's interesting when I do workshop, and we do workshops with a lot of very senior leaders, and it's amazing that it comes down to some basic stuff about listening. And the more senior the leader, they say, you know what, it's a skill that we are still working on, because it's incredibly hard to do. It's very easy to get distracted, especially when you're under stress. There's so much to worry about. The question is, are you present physically, mentally, emotionally to be able to listen to the other person? And I think this is something that needs to be taught right from the younger days. Yeah, it's absolutely critical, because listening goes to the heart of it. Sikumar, you talked about podcast. I'm doing a weekly podcast. My last one was on the art of listening. So people who are interested, you can go and have a look at that, right? And use a simple metric, right? I was listening to one CEO talk this morning. She said, I just tell my people to talk when you're going to a meeting, make sure you're talking less and speaking less and talking, listening more and speaking less. What a simple metric that is. In a room, when you're in a conversation, ask yourself at the end of the conversation, did you speak more than half the time? And if you have, it also means you have not listened, right? Unfortunately, we can't listen and speak at the same time. You can only do one. Okay? It sounds very basic, but we tend to forget it. So that is, so I talked about why is it important. So let me quickly talk about, I know I'm running out of time. Let me talk about, from my experience and my views on what we can do in terms of, and some of them we have already heard, of what would really help if these kind of things were inculcated at a younger age in schools. I think we need to start with building listening skills and make it very practical. Things like paraphrasing, right? Before I respond, rephrase what you heard, right? It makes sure that there's emotional connect. Teaching people not to interrupt somebody else when they're talking. We need to look at divergent thinking, not convergent thinking, right? Divergent thinking is when you have multiple answers to one question. Unfortunately, our education system, and it works with the exact sciences, because there's exactly one answer at the end of the book. But unfortunately, the moment you step out in the real world, there is not one answer to everything. There are multiple answers. Now, we need to create an atmosphere. We need to create that thing, which also means that it's okay. You don't have to get that one answer, right? That becomes important. We need to inculcate thinking and imagination, right? And as I said, exact sciences, yes, there is typically one answer. But what about other subjects? For instance, history, right? I never had much of an interest in history, but when I think back, and I've seen some, based on my talk with a lot of people, some of them have been history buffs and they've read a lot. And one person told me, you know what, it would have been great if history was not reduced to numbers in school, right? So it is about, hey, how was life in the Mughal era, as opposed to when was the Battle of Panipat held or fought, right? That becomes rote learning. I think we need to. I think the things are changing in that direction, but we're still a long way off. So we need to focus. We need to really move away from rote learning. The other more interesting one is cooperation as opposed to competition. Right? We are taught to be incredibly competitive. Right? Our entire education system is highly competitive. What's happening is in organizations, even two organizations which compete are also collaborating. That's one of these new things that's happening in the real world. Now the question is, can we collaborate? Do we have a mindset of collaboration? And how does it manifest? I think we need less debates. We need more discussions. See, debates is about having the right answer. It's mine versus yours, right? I want to debate with you and to show you that my thing is better and my argument is better. And finally, there's a winner also, which only reinforces the fact that yes, there is only one answer at the end of the book. No, we don't need that. I think we need more discussion, right? Absolutely critical. And linked to that is we need to reduce ranking, right? Teachers also need to empathize with students. Now, why am I saying that? Is we all have our favorites. Let's face it, we are all human. So teachers also have their favorites. They'll have the 5 or 10 students who are their favorites, and everybody else knows who the favorites are. The way we deal with them is very different from the way we deal with other students, and it leaves a tremendous amount of impact on the others. And this goes to the other tenet of emotional intelligence with self-awareness. Are you aware as to how you're dealing with everyone? Are you aware whether you're being partial to other people? Okay, that is important. I think that needs to be taught. And of course, to emphasize the importance of relationships. I'll end with that. I started with that right in the beginning, but it's important for us to understand that relationships really are the core, and we need to start building that right from a young age. Yeah, I'll end with that. Thank you.